So a few days ago, I was talking with patron John, and we were having a discussion about. He suggested, hey, do you think you could do a video about brush care? And I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. I think I'll do that. And I started thinking about it and taking a few notes and formulating, kind of a direction to take that. Literally the very next day, James Collard over at Brushstroke Painting Guides released a really, really nice video about brush care. I'll link to it up here. And as soon as I saw it, I'm like, well, that pretty much removes any motivation for me doing one, at least now. Because if you've ever seen his videos, one, they're very good. He's got a wonderful way of using graphics to explain things, and then just does a very good job of explaining his brush care and things like that. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, there are some things that I do that are a little different that may be useful for folks to see, maybe a little unorthodox, but they've worked for me. So I'll put that at the beginning. Keep in mind the things I'm going to show you that I do because they have worked for me, and they have worked for me for a long time. I try to be very careful about not showing too many things or going in too much depth about things that I haven't used and tried again and feel comfortable saying this has worked for me, so it's something you may want to consider. I get the fact that sometimes something I may show may not work the same for everybody. Everybody has different materials, different experience, different, just all sorts of differences. For example, I've used this example a few times. Years ago when I started painting with Tamiya paints, airbrushing with Tamiya paints, I just absolutely loved them. And was telling all my friends, my modeling friends, about how much I really enjoyed using Tamiya paints. This was back 2009, 2010, and at the time there were Model Master enamels readily available at the model shop that I went to, and they didn't have Tamiya paints. And so I was telling folks about it, and a few of them got excited about it, and one of them ordered a few paints and airbrushed them. And I told him how I airbrushed them, and he's a very experienced airbrush painter. And he used some, and he told me later, he said, I hated them, just absolutely hated them. And he said, I didn't like the way the finish was. I didn't like the way they went down. And he was having like tip dry problems, and I didn't have any of those. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. They work for me. So with that overly long story as way of illustration, what I'm going to show you works for me. You may want to experiment and see if any of it works for you, and if it's helpful, great. If not, you learned something not to do. So I'll move on. Now, to just do kind of a brief catch up of James' video and just the basics of brush care and all of that. This is the handle. This is the this is the metal part. The ferrule. It's the metal part. I love that gag, but I've had so many people message me, because I always joke like that in videos, and I had so many people. They're so nice that will send me these very kind messages, trying to help me with pronouncing ferrule. But I know how to say it. I just think it's funny to mess up on it and then call it the metal part. But anyway, and then of course you got your bristles, and then the fat part of the bristles. Now this is an old synthetic brush that's just kind of beat up. It just happened to be the one that I grabbed. The synthetic part of the main part of the bristles, this fat part up here, is the body, and then if this brush still had a tip, that would be the tip. And when you're painting, you want to make sure that you don't let the paint get more than about 2/3 up the bristles. You don't want it to go up into the ferrule, the metal part, because if it gets up in there and starts to dry, the bristles up in there are tightly in there like that. Well, if something gets in there to start drying, it starts just like if I put my fingers between my fingers, it starts pushing them apart. And that's why you get brushes that, while this is not a round brush, that's why you get brushes that start doing this over time. Obviously, this one has seen better days. But so, you know, you don't want paint to get up there. You want to keep that fairly clean. But you want to do some basic steps in terms of while you're working and then after you're finished of cleaning. So those are just some things to keep in mind. Now, what I'm going to talk about to kind of expound on, and you really ought to go watch James' video. It's good. But to kind of expound on what he talked about, I'm going to talk a little bit about natural hair brushes, synthetic brushes, and then dry brushes, and some things I do to take care of them. So one of the first things that I would recommend that I do that has really helped me is you really need to think about your water. Now, I've shown this before, but I use this Mr. coffee warmer, and it's quite dusty and got sanding dust and dust all over it. It's a mess, but that's okay. I use this Mr. Coffee warmer to keep my paint water warm. Now, obviously, I've got it, you know, put in some fresh water. And all I did was I ran hot water from the sink, put it in here, set it on here. It will get it as hot as drinkable coffee gets. That's how hot I like the water. While using cold water certainly, you know, helps when you're cleaning your brushes and doing things like that, I've found that warm water works better at getting things cleaned. Whether I'm cleaning at the end of a session or if I'm periodically cleaning while I'm painting. So I've found, like I said, I found having a coffee mug warmer and any kind of warming plate will do. The main thing is you just don't want it to get so hot that you don't want it boiling. You don't want it so hot that you can't stick your finger in it. You just want it, as like I said, as hot as it would be for, you know, coffee that you're drinking. and that seems to be the right temperature. Now, I don't soak my brushes in, I don't just let them sit in there. I swish them around in there, take them out, and then I keep a piece of paper towel handy and I wipe them off on that. Now, one of the things that's important about keeping your brushes clean is not letting the paint dry on it. Now, acrylic paints, and I'm really going to be talking mostly about acrylic paints in this video because I just don't use, for brush painting, I don't use enamels. I've pretty much quit using lacquers. I don't use Tamiya paints. Everything I do in terms of brush painting is acrylics. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. All of those other kinds of paints, completely different methods. You don't want to use water for Tamiya paints. You don't want to use that for lacquer paints. You don't want to use that for enamel paints. I'm not covering those at all. But let's say I'm painting along on a model and, you know, knowing that the paint will dry on it, even if you keep going back to the palette, whether it's a wet palette or a dry palette, and getting fresh paint, there's going to be a little bit that dries. Quite often on the tip, on most brushes, on most good brushes, you're going to see what's called a guide hair. And that will be just kind of a little hair that often sticks out beyond the others that help the others kind of form the point. Sometimes you don't want to remove the guide hair, but sometimes if it's extremely long, you can use very carefully, you can trim it off. And you don't want to trim it, like if this is your guide hair, you don't want to trim it any further back than here. In other words, you don't want to get down into the rest of the bristles. You really just want to get the extra protruding part of that one hair trimmed back. And if you're not sure, just leave it alone. But anyway, on the tip, especially of a smaller brush, you can see paint that will dry, much like with an airbrush. You'll get tip dry. And you might even see just this tiny little bead of paint that gets on there, and it begins interfering with the flow of the paint off the brush. Even if your paints are properly thinned, even if you use a drying retarder or something like that. So every now and then, going into the, let's say I've got some paint on my brush here, just going into it and swishing it around, and I rub it against the side of the cup like that to kind of clean it off, and then just wipe it off on the your paper towel. And sometimes if the little bead is still there, sometimes I just put it in my mouth and just kind of the motion. Somebody asked me, they're like, do you like run your tongue around it, or what do you do to molest this brush? Imagine if you've got barbecue sauce on your fingers, how you lick them off. You just, pop it in your mouth. You lick it. There's no necessary tongue action involved, really. It's just cleaning your fingers off. So that's how it is with this. I pop it in my mouth, and I just use my mouth to form it back into a pointed shape. That usually gets off that little bead of paint. Sometimes if it doesn't, I'll hold it onto my paper towel like that and just gently pull it out from under my fingers, and that will take it off. But I do that, and there's not a hard and fast time. I've heard people say every fifth time to the well, I do it this way. So I've heard some people say they do it every 2 minutes, every 5 minutes. I've just gotten to where I just look at the paintbrush and do it when I think it needs it. I don't get too worried about, every fifth time. Now, if that's how it helps you remember that every time, every fifth time you go back, you clean it off and go through that, whatever helps you remember. I just look at the paintbrush, and if I start seeing that little bead form, that tells me that's when I need to do it. Some paints are thinned to the point that I don't really have any problems. Others, if I'm using them a little thicker, it may be a problem after just 1 or 2 trips to the palette. So that's something to watch out for. But having the warm water really helps with regards to that intermediate cleaning. Now for synthetic brushes, let's say I'm done with my session. I'll go into the water and I'll just swish it around and bring it out and wipe it on here. And I'll just keep going back and forth until I get it cleared like that. And there's nothing coming off of it. And that usually suffices. If not, I take some other steps, and I'll show you those other steps in a moment. But with my synthetic brushes, and I've talked about this in videos before, but if you didn't see those or don't remember, I have different what I call classes of brushes. I've got some that are like these Blick Art. These are the golden Taklon brushes. These are my kind of high-end brushes. They've got nice points on them. They work fairly good. Not as good as the natural hair brushes, but they work fairly good. These are my favorite synthetic brushes for any purpose. I've tried the Rosemary & Co. Red Dot, the Blick Masterclass, I think is what they're called. Master Stroke. Golden Taklon brushes, I just think are a little better. But if I'm cleaning those off, I'll use that water method. If I'm cleaning the natural hair brushes, I'll use the same kind of thing, the swishing around in the water, the taking it over here. When I'm done for the day with my natural hair brushes, I'll either use some of this brush cleaner like this, or just some soap, and I'm going to demonstrate that in a little bit. But I'll use, one of those two to give them some extra cleaning, and I'll also show you how I store them so they can dry out. But I do those, the first part of the cleaning kind of the same. I'll talk about dry brushes. You won't believe how simple it is, and I just learned this from somebody else's video, how simple it is to keep these clean. But let me go into a couple of things that I do for synthetic brushes that are a little different. Now, for synthetic brushes and natural hair brushes, sometimes if I'm doing an intermediate cleaning and it's a little dirtier, or it's the final cleaning and I'm just being lazy and I don't want to get up and go into the kitchen to the sink, because I'll show you that in a minute, I'll use, this is 91% isopropyl alcohol. And sometimes, let's say I've got some paint on here, I've been painting and I've been painting a while and it's gotten up in there and it's getting a little gunky and just doing the water doesn't quite do it. Well, then I just put some alcohol in a little cup like this and I just swirl that around a little bit. The alcohol is going to be a stronger cleaner. It's going to remove more paint. It's going to, especially on the synthetic brushes. And then I just come in here and I wipe that off. I get most of it off. Of course, it evaporates really fast. Hold on. I seem to be shedding here. There we go. But I'll clean it off and then I'll just go over here real quick because you don't want that on your brush when you're painting. You don't want alcohol on there because that breaks down acrylic paint. But that will get it cleaner. Now, sometimes I'll do this alcohol cleaning at the end of a session and it gets the synthetic brushes very clean. Now, I do the same thing with my natural hair brushes. Now, I've told a few folks that and they just gasp at it and they're like, oh, you're not supposed to do that. Well, I know you're not supposed to. They tell you, you're only supposed to use, water from a specific mountain in the Himalayas that has been, brought down by a particular Swami who brings paint water to the masses. I just use the water out of my sink and I use 91% isopropyl alcohol, and I've done that on any of the synthetic brush, or not synthetic, any of the natural hair brushes I've used. I'm using Rosemary & Co. That's all I use anymore for the natural hair brushes. Mostly the Series 99 and some of the Series 33. But I use the alcohol mostly with the natural hair brushes for intermediate cleaning because it just does a good job of getting it out of there. It just pulls off more of it. And then I go over and I clean it in the alcohol or in the water just to kind of get that washed off of there. Try it and see what you think. It has worked for me. I like using it. But I'll often do that as I switch between colors because that tends to get it off of there, get a color off of there pretty good. It makes the water cleaning more productive to just give it a rinse in the alcohol and then switch over to the water. And then I can switch over to the next color. And then the big cleaning will come at the end of the session when I'm done painting. But using a little bit of isopropyl alcohol, again, I go with the 90. In fact, I think this is the 99%, not 91%. Helps me, and because I use so little, I switch it out a lot. I'll swirl it around, dump it out in a waste jar, get my little bottle here that I keep handy, and fill it back up, and keep that fairly clean. I don't mind if my paint water gets a little dirty, but I generally keep the alcohol cleaner, especially switching between major colors. If I'm using all blues or all grays or something like that, I don't worry about it. But if I'm switching from, say, red to blue, then I get rid of the red and put some fresh in there so that I can start working with the blue. So using alcohol has really been helpful for me. Now, another thing that I do that's from the completely unorthodox side of the house is I keep a jar. This is automotive grade lacquer thinner. This is some powerful lacquer thinner here. And sometimes, if I run out of this stuff, sometimes I use Mr. Color leveling thinner or other kind of modeling lacquer thinners. But for synthetic brushes, and I have to emphasize, I only use this on synthetic brushes. I do not use this on natural hair brushes. When you're thinking about the bristles in natural hair brushes, think about your own hair, even if it's like mine, mostly gone. It's real hair. You wouldn't put lacquer thinner in your hair. I don't think you would. So I certainly would not advocate I would never use lacquer thinner on my natural hair brushes. But for a quick clean of a synthetic brush, if you're having trouble getting some paint out of there ain't nothing going to remove it like this lacquer thinner. And all I do is stick it down in the jar, and I do the same thing I do with the waters. I just stick it down in there and I rub it up against the side of the jar, and then I take it out and I do that. And then after I get it mostly out of there, I get it clean in some water. That will get practically everything out of this brush. Let me show you. You see, I've been using water on this, and let's just see how much this will. This may or may not work. We'll see how, because this brush may have been as clean as it's going to get, but I can put it in here and I can start swirling around. And I don't know if you can see, but there's stuff coming off of that brush. This lacquer thinner is powerful, powerful stuff. And I just do it like that. Look at there. You see the stuff that's coming off of it. It's pulling stuff out of the ferrule, the metal part. So I keep this handy. Now I use rapid dry lacquer thinner. So by the time I get through cleaning that off like that, it's mostly evaporated, and then I just give it a quick clean in here, and that just basically stops the burn. It's burning, make it stop. But that's for synthetic brushes that I've really gotten messed up. I will sometimes use this lacquer thinner. Now, I generally do it with my older synthetic brushes that I use for rougher applications of paint. I don't generally do it with the good brushes that are synthetic, because I still sometimes use these synthetic brushes for painting, although more and more I'm just liking everything about the natural hair. So I'm not using these nicer ones much anymore at all, mainly for metallics, because the metal flakes in those, I'm still not a fan of using those with my natural hair brushes very much, maybe just in very small, tiny quantities. But this stuff, if you're really brave, this will clean everything off. I even keep it handy so that every now and then my paint stirrer, I'll run it, because you can see it's got some paint on it. I run this, swirl it down in there, wipe it off with a paper towel. That thing will be bright and shiny like it is up here at the top of it. So it's good for cleaning a lot of different equipment. Now, for my natural hair and my better synthetic brushes, if I want to give them a proper cleaning, I take them in the kitchen to the sink. Now, you don't have to do it that way with this nice warm water over here. Sometimes if I'm lazy, or sometimes if I'm in a hurry, like I realize, oh, I've got to get this cleaned up, get breakfast, get off to work, I don't have a lot of time, then I'll do it a more simplified fashion, sitting here at the desk using my brush soap. But most of the time I like to go into the kitchen and clean them off a little more proper. So let me get set up and I'll show you how that looks. Now, I'll apologize for the weird angle and poor lighting and all of that, and because I can't lock the focus, it may be coming in and out of focus as my hands move around. So I'll just have to ask you to bear with me. But there's two ways I clean brushes, and this is just an old demonstrator brush right here and a piece of paper towel. But what I do, if I'm going to use this brush soap, is I get my water running like that. Now, this is the hot water, so let me get that hot. Hang on. All right, once I get that running hot, and that's as hot as the water gets, but I can put my hand under it without any discomfort. I just run the water into that like that, pour off a little bit of it, and I just start swirling the brush around and letting the soap get up on that. And then initially I just kind of clean out the gunk that's in there from the last session. Then I just swirl it around like that. Now I'm not pushing the brush directly down into it, but I'm turning it like that and then letting it kind of chase itself around like that. And as long as you're fairly gentle with it, you're not going to mess it up. And then what I do is I just take it and I just start cleaning it in my hand like that. And sometimes I'll let some more water run into it like that and just use that soap. This is especially good for the natural hair brushes. One thing I saw an artist do, a proper paint on canvas kind of artist, is he took he would hold the bristles and he would wiggle them back and forth, not pulling out. He didn't pull this way, but he just held it at the base and just kind of wiggled it back and forth, and then would run under the water and wiggle it back and forth. And he said that helped break up paint that might be up in the ferrule. But you just do this as many times as you think is needed, like that. And get the soap on there and just wipe it off. You can wipe it off on a paper towel if you want, like that. And then I just give it a little bit of a final rinse. And then you just form a tip, and I'll show you later. You just form a tip and you let that dry vertically like this, and I'll show you how I do that in just a moment. Now, another thing I do sometimes, if I can't find this, because sometimes I put it in places to remember where it's at, and I don't remember where it's at, sometimes I'll just get some dish soap in my hands, especially more for synthetic brushes, but I do this with natural hair brushes too, and I'll just do the same kind of thing and just swirl it around. Sam Lynn's uses hair conditioner for this, so there's different ways of doing that. But you can just clean it like that. It's essentially the same motion, the same type of thing. And when I wipe it off on my paper towel and see that there's no more paint coming off, I know that it's clean. Now, I don't know if I've shown this before, but I use this. This is actually a shoe sorting shelf unit that's supposed to go in your closet, and you can stack your shoes in it. Well, I use it at the back of my model desk for storing paints, glue, everything. This is where I keep everything. I'm starting to wish I had a better system, because sometimes it's really deep and sometimes it can be tough to get back in there. So it's not ideal, but it is what it is. It's what I've got, so I go with it. But I take these clothespins like that, and I just clip them on. I got 4 of them, and I can add more if I want. But when I'm letting my brushes dry, I just take them and I stick them in there like that, and let them dry. And I let them, usually when they're up there drying, I let them dry overnight. If I'm working on a project, I tend to just keep the same brushes hanging up there, because on most projects I tend to use the same brushes over and over. So I'll leave them up here, let them dry, come back the next day, grab them out of there, work with them. When I'm done, set it back up there. And then once they're dry and they're finished, usually what I'll do is I'll pop them in my mouth one more time and just kind of bring it to a point. And then I have a couple of jars. These are, I think, jelly jars that I keep. One for my synthetic brushes, and I just drop them in there and store them straight up like that. And then I have another for my Rosemary & Co. brushes, and I just keep those pointed straight up. And I keep the plastic tips on the natural hair or the good synthetics. I keep the little plastic tip on it just to protect it. You may not choose to do that, but that's what I do. But yeah, just hanging them up here is a really great way. If you don't have any way of finding where to hang them up like that, any kind of clamp will work. If you have to store them on your desk, what I recommend is that you do something so that it stores it so the tip is not touching anything, but it's leaning down. Even if it's just, I've seen some folks that just take some blue tack and they just put it on there like that and just set it on the desk with the blue tack. So there's several ways of doing that. But I find that works really, really well for making sure the paint doesn't dry in the ferrule, and it lets everything drain out of there. Now, when it comes to cleaning the dry brushes, what I typically do, and this has changed because, again, thanks to James Collard, who I actually learned this from him in a private message. He and I were messaging about some things, and he knows if you keep up with Artis Opus, he knows Byron Ord. Apparently, they must live near each other, because he knows him like as in, hey, go hang out with Byron kind of thing. And Artis Opus has started working with brushstroke painting guides, which I'm really happy for James that he's got that. And they supply him with brushes, and there's even a brushstroke painting guide set of brushes that you can get at Artis Opus now, with a nice box with James's logo on it and his choice of brushes in it. And if you get that, James gets a little bit of a kickback from it, which I think is great for James. I am a huge fan of James. Kind of a sidebar rabbit chase. I've just kind of given up watching the silliness when it comes to mini painting. Guys like James, Sarastro, Duncan Rhodes, there are others like that. The ones that focus on painting, they focus on being helpful. They're not trying to be clever. Yes, they've got good videography, but the point of the whole thing is not videography. They're not trying to be clever. There's no silliness involved. When you watch a video, it's going to be Dave Perryman, Richard Gray. Those guys, they're painting. They're painting. They're not using their blood to try and make effects. They're not talking about how, I'm going to read all of the people who've criticized me and then laugh at them and mock them. I'm not going to, do a video of me making the world's biggest diorama ever and show you how cool it looks, but it really comes out more like an Ocean's 11 movie that you're like, I'm not sure what I just watched. And yes, that is criticism, but it's not that I dislike those people or actively, want them to fail. That's what people want. That's the entertainment people want. James and those other guys I mentioned, they show you how to do stuff. And to me, that's important. That's my goal. I've quit. I've realized I'm never going to be a YouTuber. I've talked about this a little. I'm never going to be a YouTuber. This is a hobby. I'm a guy who paints stuff and just happens to like putting it on video. So anyway, all of that aside, James told me that the way Byron showed him that he cleaned his brushes was once he's done, he just starts cleaning them off like this. And I started doing this, and hang on, let me focus because I'm sure the focus is just going crazy with me doing that. There, hopefully that won't be bouncing back and forth as I do this. But he just, now obviously he does it on an area that's dry, and I actually have another palette like this. I don't know what this stuff is. It's this board that came from the back of some photographs. One side is very smooth and one side is very rough, just like the textured thing. I'm trying to find where I can get this because I'm guessing this would be much cheaper than the Artis Opus textured thing. But I just use it and I just keep going back and forth with it like that after the paint has dried. And sometimes you can come back several days later and do it. And then I just grab it by the edge and I just start again working it off like that. And after a while, it works off most of the paint. These are the two that I use the most, and I haven't washed them proper for a couple of months now. And you can see how they look. There's a slight bit of discoloration, but they retain their shape really well, and they stay fairly clean. And that's all I do is just now. It takes a little while. If you've used a color like red or something like that, red is a very strong color to clean off, and it may take a while, but I do it like that, and it works really well. If I do need to clean it, and red would probably be the most likely culprit, I do it exactly the way I showed you when I was in there at the sink. I just get the warm water running, and I put some dish soap in my hand, and I just swirl it around like that, and let the warm water run over it. And I pull my hand out from under the water, and I do it with the dish soap like that again, and I work the stuff out. And sometimes I reach up there and I do that, tease it out like that. And I just keep going back and forth until the bristles look reasonably clean. And then I hang it up here. And because the handle is kind of fat, I actually use a clamp like this, and I clamp it up against those vertical shelf separators. I just clamp it against that and then slide that up in there. But I store it vertically and let it dry. Once it's dry and I've done the major cleaning with that, then I come back and just do a final cleaning just like I did before with the dry brushing method, the motion like that. And it doesn't have to be a texture palette. Anything with an edge, a kitchen tile, I could use this thing here. Anything that's just a hard edge, because what that does when that paint dries on those bristles, apparently that just flakes it right off. And sometimes I'll even get like a little. I'll notice there's just like a little powder of paint here on the work desk, and I just clean that up. Ever since James, and obviously I'm a fan of the James Collard fan club, or I'm in the James Collard fan club. I do support him on, he has a YouTube members program, and I support him there. Like I said, I like to see guys like him succeed. He doesn't do the silly entertainment, but he's helpful, and that's what it's all about. But anyway, that's how I keep the dry brushes clean, and it works really well. These are, if you're wondering, these are Rosemary & Co. dry brushes. Rosemary & Co. makes Artis Opus brushes. The Artis Opus brushes, the brushes themselves, the paint brushes, are a little different than the Series 33. The sable used in the Series 33 is the same as the Artis Opus brushes. The bristle count is a little different, and the shape of the handle is a little different. But if you're wanting something that's similar, the equivalent of it, but not quite as expensive, the Series 33 or the Series 323 for the shorter Artis Opus brushes, those are the equivalents. Now, I've gotten to where, because it's easier to get them here in the U.S., I like the Series 99 and the Series 93. They're pure sable rather than Kolinsky sable. And apparently the difference is the Kolinsky sable were the ones that in sable school walked around with their sweaters tied around their necks. But the pure sable were the ones that walked around with the Metallica t-shirts on. So they both went to the same school, both sables, but I identify with the ones that walked around with the Metallica t-shirts a little better. So I haven't noticed any difference between the Series 33 and Series 99, quite honestly. They work exactly the same in my mind. And so because I can get them here, and the Series 99 are much more affordable, I've stuck with those. But these methods that I've shown you will work with any brush. So it doesn't have to be Rosemary & Co. And if you're wondering, no, Rosemary & Co. does not sponsor me. They don't know who I am. They don't give me anything. And if you're wondering why I put these stickers here, I just like their product. And when they send you something, they give you stickers, and I stick stickers. You can't see them all, but I've got stickers all up here, and I just love stickers. So anyway, I'm not even sure what I'm going on about now. All right, that was supposed to be a short video to kind of fill in a few things, a few additional thoughts I had that James didn't cover in his very concise, very professionally done, very helpful video. So it's been kind of long, sorry. But I hope this has been helpful, that, talking about brushes. And of course, if there's any questions you have, drop them down below in either the Patreon comments, questions area, or on the YouTube video. I don't care which one you do. I like them being in the Patreon area, because that way other people can read them. But if you do it in the video area, that's fine too. Doesn't matter to me. But if you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see if I can answer them. And and John, I want to thank John for this idea. It it's a good idea, and I had fun putting this together. So thank you, John, for that. And if you've got any content ideas that you have, anything you'd like to see, then let me know. And if it's something I can put together, something I think I can talk about with some degree of helpfulness. I can't guarantee it'll be short, but I can guarantee you it'll be a video. So anyway, thank you so much for being a patron, and you know the deal. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.